Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I overheard some of my colleagues here on the Senate floor complaining about what happened at the Senate Banking Committee today, and I want to address this, set the record straight, and provide a little historical context, which I think is important. Last week, the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Chairman Brown, indicated that he wanted to have votes on 6 nominees within the Banking Committee jurisdiction. 5 were to be governors of the Federal Reserve. They had been nominated to Federal Reserve posts, and 1 is the director of the FHFA. Now, I told the chairman last week that as far as Republicans on the committee were concerned, we were perfectly fine proceeding to votes on 5 of the 6. 5 of the 6 nominees we were ready to have votes on. And those 5 included the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, the vice chair, Lael Brainerd, nominee, Professor Lisa Cook, nominee, Professor Philip Jefferson, and the nominee to be the director of the FHFA, Sandra Thompson. All of those, we were fine with the vote. And by the way, some of those nominees have significant Republican support. At least 1, I think, has no Republican support on the committee, but that didn't matter. We were prepared to go and vote on these nominees. But the 6th nominee that Chairman Brown wanted to have a vote on, Sarah Bloom Raskin. And I told him then, this was like last Thursday, that she had chosen not to answer quite a number of important questions that we had. That is the normal part of the vetting process that a committee goes through when there's a nominee. In particular, she chose not to answer questions about a highly unusual transaction that occurred on a company on whose board she sat after she left the Fed, or her position as a governor at the Fed and then a senior Treasury staffer. Chairman Brown said he'd help us get answers to these questions, but we've been stonewalled. We were stonewalled before. We've been stonewalled since. And so today, I informed the chairman that it's a review of Republican members of the committee that we can still go ahead and vote on the 5. So I've heard them talk about how important it is that we populate the Fed with governors. Well, 4 out of the 5 nominees we were prepared to vote on are Fed governors. We could have had that vote already. We could have that vote tonight. We could do it tomorrow. There's no problem with that. But rather than advance 5 nominees through the committee, Chairman Brown decided he'd rather have 0. So we're at 0. That's his choice. He could have had 5 advanced through the committee. And you have to ask yourself, why would it be so important to my Democratic colleagues that we forgo the opportunity to move 5 along the process if it means that for now, Sarah Bloom Raskin doesn't get a vote for what, by the way, would be a 10-year term on the Fed? And there's only one plausible explanation for why they would be willing to leave all these vacancies when they could go down the road through the process of filling these vacancies. And apparently it's because getting the climate warrior into this spot on the Fed Board of Governors, specifically the vice chairman of supervision, that's the spot for which Sarah Bloom Raskin has been nominated, getting her there must be the most important thing. In fact, it must be more important than getting all 5 of the other people confirmed, because that's the decision that they made today. So then you got to ask yourself, why would that be that important? Why would it be so important to get Ms. Raskin in this spot at the Fed? Well, again, I think it's pretty clear what's going on here. And that is that our Democratic colleagues have a climate agenda for which they don't want to take responsibility. We're seeing this manifest itself. It's the energy policy of this majority, the Democratic majority in this administration has contributed significantly to this huge surge in energy prices, and it's kind of causing a panic over there. Because American people don't really enjoy paying $5 a gallon or more for gasoline. They're not looking forward to 20, 30, 50% increase in the cost of heating their home. They're not in favor of the policies that our Democratic colleagues advocate, which is shut down pipelines, ban drilling, make sure we make less energy, make sure we produce less oil and gas, the energy we need for our daily lives. Because when you do produce much less, prices go up. The American people are not that enthusiastic about this. So for our Democratic colleagues, there's a bit of a dilemma, right? How do you satisfy the climate warriors who absolutely want much higher prices, absolutely want to shut down energy production? But how do you do that without getting crosswise with the voters who really don't think that's a good idea? How could you balance that? Well, there's a way to do it. Just shirk your responsibility and put it on the Fed. Perfect. Don't deal with legislation. Don't let the American people know what you want to do. And certainly, don't take responsibility for the consequence of your actions. Let the Fed do it. And then, if the Fed does these policies and prices go through the roof, blame them. It's perfect. And lo and behold, we have the nomination of Sarah Bloom Raskin. She's got very impressive credentials. She's very smart. But she's also told us exactly what she wants to do. She's told us repeatedly. She's told us in speeches. She's written op-eds. She's written articles right up through last year where she has specifically and forcefully advocated that we use the supervisory powers of the Fed, which are enormous, to steer capital away from fossil fuel energy companies and steer it towards politically favored industries. So in other words, turn the Fed into a body that allocates capital. Turn the Fed into a policy-making arm of the government. It's a shocking notion that the Fed, who's supposed to be responsible for monetary policy, supposed to be responsible for stable prices and full employment, they haven't been doing such a great job on the stable prices front, by the way. What they want to do is have the Fed take on this whole new responsibility. It's perfect. From their point of view, it's a way to advance this climate agenda without having to take responsibility for it. So, Mr. President, that's the reason that I'm strongly opposed to Sarah Bloom Raskin serving as the Vice Chair for Supervision on the Fed. But that is not the reason that every Republican agreed that it would be premature to vote on her candidacy today. See, the reason for that is because she refuses to answer questions. It was very difficult getting a complete, I don't know if we even now have a complete application from her. There were things dribbling out that should have been presented as a complete package much earlier in this process. But now, she's refused to answer very fundamental questions, especially about a firm called Reserve Trust and her role there. So let me walk through briefly the sequence of events, and I think you'll see why we've got some questions. Reserve Trust is a fintech company. It's based in Colorado. And like many fintech companies, they decided it would be enormously valuable for them to have access to the Federal Reserve's banking, to have direct access to the Federal Reserve payment wires. To get that access, they applied for something that's called a master account. Well, to my knowledge, the Fed has never approved a master account for a fintech company of this nature. And so, unsurprisingly, the Fed turned down the application by Reserve Trust for a master account. Then Sarah Bloom Raskin, who's on the board of Reserve Trust, she had been a Fed governor, and she'd worked in a senior post at Treasury, then she joined the board of Reserve Trust. Well, after the application, Raskin called the president of the Kansas City Fed and lobbied for them to get the account. Now, how do I know that? Well, it's because the president of the Kansas City Fed told me. But Sarah Bloom Raskin hasn't. When asked the question, did you call anyone at the Fed on behalf of Reserve Trust, she seemed to have developed a case of amnesia. Couldn't recall. That's funny. The person who received the call remembered, and the chairman of the board of Reserve Trust knew all about this call, but Sarah Bloom Raskin had no recollection. So what happened next? So they applied for the master account. It's turned down. Sarah Bloom Raskin calls the Fed, and then within months, the Federal Reserve does a 180-degree turn, reverses itself, and approves the transaction. A few months after that, Sarah Bloom Raskin steps down from the board and pockets $1.5 million in stocks that she had been granted. All right. About that sequence of events, I don't think there's anybody that disputes the factual accuracy. What we want to know is, how did this happen? Because now the Reserve Trust is the one fintech in America that I'm aware of that got a master account at the Fed. It's enormously valuable. At least it is to them. You should see the advertising they do about it. They were turned down, and then it was all approved. So I think we have a responsibility to find out, how did that 180-degree reversal by the Fed take place? How was that decision taken? Who made that decision and why? And we've asked for the documents that would substantiate that. An explanation first would be nice, and documents to back it up. We've asked that of Sarah Bloom Raskin. She's told us she doesn't recall whether or why it was important to Reserve Trust to get the master account. That's funny. It seems like it was the most important thing to that company, and she was on their board, and she made the call. But this is the kind of stonewalling we're dealing with. Can't get answers to basic, simple questions. Who'd you talk to? When did you talk to them? What was the nature of the conversation? And from the Fed, what was the review process? What led you to change your conclusion? Do you have a memo from the general counsel laying out the case? By the way, there's lots of applications out there still pending. There's lots of fintech companies that would love to get the master account that Reserve Trust got. If there's a way to do that legally, I think everybody ought to know what it is so that they can decide whether, as a business matter, they want to pursue that. It's pretty hard for anybody to pursue that when they get stonewalled, as we are getting stonewalled. It's pretty rich when I hear some of my colleagues come down here and complain that Republicans didn't show up at the committee today. This is the only recourse we have. When we're getting stonewalled, we can't get an answer to basic questions, which is our responsibility to get answers to these questions. What else can we do? There's nothing else we can do. We offered to vote on the 5 nominees that actually did provide answers to the questions in their applications. But as I said, the chairman preferred to have 0 people advance today rather than have 5. And it's particularly rich when you consider that the chairman himself, just in the last couple of years, urged his Democratic colleagues to boycott a finance committee markup over nominees that he wasn't satisfied with. So, Mr. President, I think this context is important, and I remind my colleagues, Republicans on the Banking Committee, quite happy to vote on 5 nominees, including 4 Fed governors, but we're not willing to vote for Ms. Raskin until we get some answers to our questions. I yield the floor.